very distinguished colleagues. The last contribution by distinguished Senator Ranking Ahmed Lawal has also modified my thoughts on this issue. First, I believe that ultimately we must work towards self-sufficiency in food production. And we should, as much as possible, reorientate our consumption such that, as it was said before, we eat what we produce and produce what we eat. I also submit to the general principle of the bill, which says that we just need to formulate appropriate microeconomic policies that will transfer prosperities to our rural people when we take agriculture as a serious business. But having listened to distinguished Senator Ahmed Lawal with regards to the fact that we can produce wheat, my question is, we talk about our potential, we can do all of this. Why are we not doing it? Because according to this document, even though no evidence was attached, it claims that we are spending as much as $3 billion every year to import wheat. And so the inclusion of cassava will reduce the amount of wheat importation. But then distinguished Senator Ahmed Lawal reminds us that that importation is not inevitable if we get our policies right, provide the right incentive, and educate our farmers and give them what they need to go back to the farm and produce wheat. So between these two, I believe that they are all doable. Now, my problem is Senator Lawal said we shouldn't do it by law. Sometimes I don't like too many laws. Because we're forced there, you have to go to court. Persuasion seems effective, but in this environment, persuasion oftentimes doesn't work. So given that we can do both, encourage wheat production, as they are suggested, and I'm 100% in support of that. Because I can just imagine if people in those parts of the country where wheat production is viable are encouraged and they have incentive and protection so to do, we will be dealing with poverty without giving them handout. On the other hand, those parts of the country as well, I'm sure, also do produce cassava. There is no part of Nigeria where cassava production is not viable. And so it is not to choose one against the other. Public policies should seek to promote both. Unfortunately, and it bears repeating, if the textile industry was flourishing and growing, they need a lot of cassava to produce starch, which you need for Siri to wear the kind of tapu he's wearing. So my conclusion, therefore, is whatever we can do to encourage and provide incentive, because if we just make the law will be lied here. At best, you send somebody to prison if there's a breach, but that may not translate to whatever. So let's encourage cassava production by adopting his recommendation. On the other hand, simultaneously, let's encourage the production of wheat. Because the foreign powers that adopt these things in our country, they will do everything possible. In some part of the country, they subsidize wheat. They even throw excess into the sea, just so that their farmers get ready market. That is how they achieve food sufficiency. But here, when our farmers overproduce, the price crash, then they move away. And 10 years later, we come back. Like he said, during the military, there have been huge debate about the need to reduce our dependence on imported wheat. So whatever we can do, and I'm not so sure now after listening to him, I think there must be some additional reflection we need to do as to how to couch this law so that we are not promoting one at the expense of the other, since both are viable in this country.
Thank you.
Good news, all over Nigeria you can produce cassava. I'm not so sure whether wheat is available all over. But however, wherever it is, let's be seen to work to promote rural economy in all its ramifications. Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes, you believe that policy can also promote inclusion of 10% of cassava. You also say, well, maybe not just policy, we can also make a law to include the 10%. However, that you also believe that, like the Senior Senator Ahmed Lawans pointed out, a task force once enabled Nigeria to produce enough wheat. I think what is lacking from his submission, what made that policy to fail was that we did not have a kind of policy that will enable us to buy from the farmers. If the federal government had absorbed everything the farmers produced, whether we throw it away or we share it free, you understand, like the foreign powers do, the farmers would have been encouraged to continue. But where they produce and then there was no market, and then the federal government did not buy from them, automatically they lost the incentive. So it's very clear that we have to promote both sides, like you said. So I share your opinion. I was watching you closely to see where you would tilt to at the end, but you remain in the middle. So, Deputy Senate President, add value to it.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill is talking about is trying to deal with that situation that I always describe, that old habits die hard. This bill is all about our national interest. That is, let's utilize what we produce everywhere in this country. In the north, in the south, everywhere. Every state produces cassava. One of the crops you can find anywhere, everywhere. That we import wheat. And experts have studied and reached a conclusion that when you use certain amount of cassava added to wheat, it's good for us. It's good for us to produce bread, and it will serve the purpose that we want the bread to be, how we want bread to be, and that will reduce cost, and also it will allow us to utilize what we have. It's simple as that. And then you need legislation, because this thing has been said over and over again. But the bakers have refused to go in line with the study that experts have made about the bread we need to produce in this country, that create a legislation to enforce them to use this formula. Simple. Am I right? Very, very simple. It's in line with our national interest. Yes, we produce wheat, but not in all parts of the country. We produce wheat, we can cultivate wheat in the northern part of the country and some other areas, but not like cassava. Cassava is everywhere. It's in a national interest. Look, this is good for us. Very, very good for us. It will allows our farmers to now cross more, reduce the money we use importing wheat every year, and so it will help us to conserve our foreign exchange. It's as simple as that. Mr. President, this bill is very simple. Let's support it in the interest of our nation. It's very simple. So, Mr. President, I so submit. Please support this bill. It will help our country. It will help our farmers. We can produce. It's something we produce everywhere. It's something we produce everywhere. You produce cassava here in Abuja. In Nasarawa, you produce cassava. In Kano, you produce cassava. In Borno, you produce cassava. Let's use what we have instead of using wheat all around 100%. We can now use 20%, add 20%, cut the cost of importing wheat, so that we now conserve foreign exchange. It's simple. Mr. President, let's support this bill. Please, my colleagues, support this bill in line with our national interests. Thank you, Mr. President.
Benefiting and profit sharing from importation of the products. But like I said, whatever we do, we must have a way where the federal government can become the off-taker. Let the farmers produce, whether cassava, whether wheat, and then we buy bulk from them. Even if it means in periods of scarcity, we release free to the consumers, to Nigerians. They need the food anyway. And so that it will encourage farmers to produce. So if they do so, then there may not be any need for any mandatory law. But at the same time, it's also good to have the mix so that we don't run into a situation whereby, for instance, I think it was Ukraine that was producing a lot of the wheat, almost 1/3 of the wheat of the world. When they went into the war, the price of bread all over skyrocketed because of the war with Russia. So Nigeria should also come back with that task force to task our farmers to produce. But this time, we should have a policy where we can buy from them if there is excess so that it will encourage them. Because if they produce and then they end up losing, then the incentive will not be there. Distinguished Senator Ome and Senator Nengi, if there is anything you want to add, just 1 more minute so that we go into other items.
Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Senator Abdul Ningi, and I represent Bauchi Central of Bauchi State. Mr. President, this is a bill about cassava, and therefore, in the argument being debated, you look at the merits of why this bill is necessary and why this bill is important. And I have listened attentively to the Deputy Senate President, and I think he has captured the essence of this bill. First and foremost, the argument about wheat, much as it is important, but it is also imperative for people to be aware that we import wheat, and it is the importation of wheat that has taken a lot of our income. The bottom line and the question, do we also import cassava? The argument is no. Do we grow cassava in Nigeria? The argument is yes. 36 states out of 36 states, including FCT, grows cassava, and therefore cassava is like an inheritance to Nigeria. It is something that is grown here, and it is something that must be encouraged. First thing first, do we have availability of cassava to be able to take the place of wheat? The answer is no. And why don't we have the availability of cassava? Because there are no laid down regulations that will encourage the production of cassava. This is what this bill is about. And to further buttress the argument that this bill is all-encompassing, look at objectives of the bill, particularly number 4, provide a tax regime and incentives for producers of mixed wheat and cassava flours and wheat importers who include cassava flour in imported wheat. So the issue of wheat has been clearly taken care of. But what is important is like what the Deputy Senate, the former Senate President said. What do we do as a country in order for us, once this bill passes through, to be able to take advantage and give the derivables for an average Nigerian to benefit from it? This bill, Mr. President, is apt, is timely, and it is important for people to recognize that cassava,
once we pay attention to it, we'll now plug the gap of the revenues, of the hard-earned revenues that we use to import wheat. So when you bring the argument of including wheat, I think you are begging the question. But this bill is about cassava. And because cassava is inherent, we are the largest producers of cassava in Africa and even in the world. So we must take advantage about getting cassava availability to Nigerians to add value to the flour, to the bread making mechanisms. So I think it is important to separate these things. And at the end of the day, you take it to the public hearing. Most of the arguments I have had today are arguments that will be heard during the public hearing. So therefore, a bill at the second reading is about the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I think this bill has merit enough argument to have it pass through this second reading. And I so support that this bill should pass through second reading. Thank you.
Thank you, distinguished colleagues.
Associate myself with the intention of the sponsor of the bill to ensure that we include cassava flour production in our flour production activities in Nigeria, to be able to curtail the heavy reliance on wheat for making bread and things like that. It's a very noble observation he made, but my worry is about who the bill is, the law will be targeted to. Who is the law directed at? Mandatory mandatory inclusion of cassava flour in our production. Are we directing the law to the cassava producer or to those who are involved in the flour business? Because cassava production is a business. And if we want to ensure that we increase investment in cassava flour production, in business, I don't think it is law that you use to compel somebody to take advantage of the viability of a business. The cassava producer should be the one who will be desperate to produce cassava flour. If we pass this law, for example, my question will be, who is it directed at for enforcement? Because this thing we are doing is something I believe verily that will be promoted and supported through policy, government policy towards encouraging people to go into cassava flour production as a template to reduce total reliance on wheat for production of bread and allied things. So I know that from proponents of the speeches already made, people are saying we support. I don't want to oppose my friend who is sponsoring this bill, but we have to look at the person this law is directed at. Mandatory inclusion. If we pass a law, say that cassava flour must be included in flour production, who will implement it? Somebody who is doing business will go into a business that is profitable. And unless we encourage through the government policies, make this cassava flour processing very attractive through various means, we'll be able to get at the target we are going to.
Thank you.
I just want to make an observation.
Thank you, but let me hear.
Who the law is being addressed, who is being directed at.
Okay, let me hear one.
SB 254. Your Excellency, distinguished colleagues, the bill on cassava flour, which was read the first time in this hallowed chamber on Wednesday, the 8th of November, 2023, The bill seeks to provide a legal and regulatory framework for the mandatory inclusion of high-quality cassava flour in our edible wheat flour production and its derivatives. Your Excellency, distinguished colleagues, Nigeria, being the world's largest producer of cassava, has an annual output of over 63 million metric tons as of 2021, which represents 1/3 of the total output for Africa. Nigeria can take advantage of this high demand of cassava in both domestic and industrial use, locally and in international markets, which is also now used for new energy. Over the past years, successive governments since the return to democratic rule has attempted to put in place policies and legislation to encourage the inclusion of cassava in edible flour, realizing its immense benefit and cost saving to the nation. The use of cassava in wheat can significantly reduce the cost of importation of wheat, which presently stands at over $3 billion per annum. The prolonged war between Russia and Ukraine had further increased the cost of wheat globally, thereby necessitating the need to seek alternative ways to reduce the cost of wheat and all its derivatives, especially bread, which is a major staple food for the masses in Nigeria. The continued importation of wheat has negative impacts on the Nigerian economy, causing trade imbalance, loss of foreign exchange, and fueling food dependency. The bill, Your Excellency, if passed into law, will stimulate jobs creation in the agricultural sector and increase our market share of cassava earnings in foreign exchange. Your Excellency, distinguished colleagues, I would like to draw this hollow chamber to some of the objectives that this bill includes. 1. Mandatory inclusion of 20% high-quality cassava flour in wheat by all producers for edible flour in Nigeria or imported into the country. 2. Encourage cassava farming and create a sustainable market for cassava flour. 3. Mandate the publication of regulations for the proportion of cassava flour in relation to wheat to be applied in processes of making edible flour. 4. Provide a tax regime and incentive for producers of mixed wheat and cassava flour and wheat importers who include cassava flour in imported wheat. Your Excellency, distinguished colleagues, in conclusion, in increasing demand for cassava-based produce, both in domestic and international market, creates prospects for our market expansion and value addition. The passage of this bill will enhance the efficiency of cassava production and processing operations, as cassava is a choice for crop for the rural development, poverty alleviation, economic growth, and ultimately food security. It will further promote technology innovation and improve access to finance and market linkages that can stimulate the growth of cassava processing industry and create avenues for entrepreneurship and employment of women and youth. Your Excellency, distinguished colleagues, I will appeal to this hollow chamber that it will also reduce the country's food import bill, enhance the utilization of local crops, create opportunities for businesses and employment, and genuinely boost rural development. The passage of this bill is also in alignment with the 20% cassava for flour inclusion policy initiated in June 2021 by the then Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development, now renamed as the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security. Your Excellency, distinguished colleagues, I would want this hollow chamber to look at cassava as a staple food and as a means of adding more varieties and reducing the cost of wheat flour, which is majorly being imported into the country. I hope with these few remarks of mine, this hollow chamber will consider this bill. Thank you, Your Excellency.